about it, it might come as a little bit of a shock because I am going to speak honestly about what you guys need to do to improve. So it's kind of like, you guys probably haven't heard of this guy, Chris Oakley. He used to be a character designer for Disney and now he's got a podcast and stuff. He says that you're never as bad or as good as you think you are. And I think that's pretty good, right? That's a pretty good thing. If you think you're pretty amazing at any stage in your career, you're probably not as good as you think you are. And if you think you're like garbage and the worst, at everything, you're definitely not as bad as you think you are. You're probably somewhere in the middle. There's always going to be people that are better than you, and always going to be people that haven't tried as hard or as long as you have as well. So real quick, while anybody's compiling that, let's talk about write-ups, because you need to start doing your write-up. So there are some professional examples here, and anything that has the words by student in the description will link to that student's write-up in their project. And the one caveat to that is the site that we used to do this on, that I was paying for and running myself, has died. And so if it's a couple years old, then that link is going to go somewhere dead, right? But recently it'll go to Behance, and so that'll show up. Then I'll talk about some examples here and some photographing. So all of this for your write-up is going to be graded off of this write-up rubric. Okay, this write-up rubric is really important, and you might look at that and say, oh look, a list. And that's what I would do. And so if you write it up in this order, and you hit each of these points, then you will get all of the points for your write-up. Okay, my intention is for you to get all of the points for your write-up. Okay, a description of your concept and objectives. Most people get this confused and they write what the assignment is. The assignment is not your objectives. The assignment is I want you to make 12 icons for this class. Okay, your objectives are different, right? Your objectives are I'm going to create an icon set about this or that says this to these people, right? Message and audience are your objectives. It's not a number of icons. It's not an assignment. You don't mention me by name, okay? So what you're going to say is I'm trying to make an icon set, that'll help people find their way in an airport and understand where they're supposed to go. So we've got message and audience there, right, or whatever. Okay, then you're going to show an image of your sketches. We'll talk about that in a minute, but basically, I just want to see your sketches. Okay, then a few lines about your sketching process and your thoughts and reasons development in the sketches shown, right? And so just talk about what you're trying to achieve, basically. Okay, and so you might break your sketches down into groups. You might just talk about your sketches as a whole. There's not a right or a wrong way to do that. But just tell me what you're thinking, right? I came up against, as soon as I started sketching, I realized that I had to solve these problems. And so I tried to solve these problems. You can see a few sketches that do this, and a few sketches that do that, that type of thing, okay? Then I want to see an image of your draft. Then you're going to write a line or two about how you got feedback and incorporated that feedback into your draft. Again, your temptation is going to be to use terminology that doesn't make sense to the outside world. What I mean is, brother so-and-so only makes sense like on this campus and in church buildings, okay? So if you refer to me as Brother Kerr online, people are going to wonder if you're attending some sort of seminarian program or if I'm some kind of like monk or something, right? So don't confuse people with terminology that they don't understand, right? You can mention me or not. I don't care if you mention me or not. But you're going to also get feedback from your peers and others. And so you can just talk about the critiques and feedback that you got and how you applied it, how that changed. And sometimes I've seen people just merely say, after getting some feedback, I made the following changes. And that's fine. It's not like you need to go into a deep discussion about the existential crisis that you had during the feedback that you got. Then you're going to show your final image, and then you're going to have a few lines defending how your image meets the objectives. Again, your objectives are not the assignment. So don't say, as you can see, I set out to make 12 icons, and if you count them, there are 12 there, and they are icons, thus they're my objectives. All right, that isn't an objective statement. What you're going to say is something along the lines of, I was trying to accomplish this. So I made these choices to accomplish that. And that speaks to this audience, right? Message and audience. So you start with message and audience, you end with message and audience. Questions about your write-up? Okay, real quick, I'm going to go through an example here. I'm only going to go through one because I want this to kind of sit, and we'll talk about more of these on Wednesday. Okay, this is a case study by a professional, and it's one of the better case studies I've seen, and it follows this format. So he starts with a mock-up, which I think is always a really good idea. Mock-ups are great. We'll talk more about that later. Then he says this: the job was to design a logo for a new internet shop offering high-quality cashmere products. A Sunsayer will be selling not only off-the-shelf clothing, but will also allow clients to customize products that they would like to buy. This element is an essential part of the brand, even as the name comes from the abbreviation "as unique as you are." The client's initial wish was to base the design on a front-facing head of a goat, had to be sophisticated, structured, strong, and suggesting luxurious products. What do you guys notice about those two paragraphs there?
Stated an objective, a goal, an inspiration.
Okay, good. What else? Yeah.
He also gave background information on the product itself, what it, who's making the logo for. You
Okay.
need to have an idea. Well, people are going to make icons. Well, like you said, to help people in the airport. Giving us some sort of a background as to.
Yeah. So there's some context of where they'll be used, how they'll be used, and who they'll be used for. Has anybody done a creative brief or read a creative brief before? Okay, so you guys will. There are some key words in here that are really important. What key words do you think should drive the design based on this opening statement here? Say that out loud. That last sentence is chock full of key words. Those aren't random. Those come from conversations with the client. Okay? And that the client will never come to you and say, I'm saying this to these people and I would like it to feel like this, right? They're going to come to you and say, I want a logo. And then you need to ask the right questions to get to the point where they say things like, I want it to be sophisticated, structured, strong, and I want people to think of luxurious products when they encounter it. Okay? Those all come from questions like, how would you like people to feel when they come in contact with your brand? What would you like them to remember after spending several minutes on your website? Right? Those are all questions that you as the professional would ask. Okay? And then he shows us sketches. And I want you to look at his sketches. Some of them are good. Many of them are quite bad. And he's showing all of them. Right? He's not handpicking the good and the bad. He's showing the process. Okay, and you can see his iteration. Okay, you can see him say, well, what if it faced sideways? I don't like the beard. Oh, I don't like that beard. I'm just going to do it again. What if it was split? What if it was curved? What if it was straight? Right? What if it was straight again? I don't see a lot of difference between these two, but it looks like he's kind of working on the ear a little bit. Right? And then he's going through and he's like, look at as many times as he tried to make the hanger work. Okay, he tried so many different ways to get a mountain or a goat head or a goat laying down, okay, to be this hanger. Okay, he's iterating through this process, and you can see that he's even trying like the beginner stuff, like what if I put it in a square, right? You can see all of that. So he's going through and he's trying all this, and he's trying to incorporate seals, and he's trying to incorporate like how do I work the text into this thing? Okay, and then he has some initial concepts and concerns. Okay, so he turns these into the client. All of these designs have been presented to the client as preliminary ideas of the brand mark, right? So he says, here you go, I made some stuff. A few of them seem to have potential, but I was not particularly happy with any of them. So it doesn't just happen to students, it also happens to professionals. Especially the goat's head design seemed a bit unsatisfactory compared with the number of sketches I'd already produced. In other words, I did a lot of work, and I wasn't really happy with where I got. Based on the amount of work that I produced, I feel like it should be better. That was not a good sign. And to make matters even worse, I felt quite creatively drained by this project. And the final blow came when I got a reply from the client, and he was not impressed with any of my proposals. So if this were a narrative, this would be the low point in the story, right? This is the point where we, like we hit rock bottom type thing. A little dramatic for a logo, but that's all narratives exist. Okay, so then breaking the funk. Luckily, after a short break from the project, my creative block suddenly went away. I'm sure there's more of that than me saying here. And I was I was able to prepare 2 new proposals. Importantly, both of them were clearly superior to the initial set. So there's one, and here's the second one. My client was particularly happy with the below design that uses a fingerprint pattern to depict a goat silhouette. Finally, an idea that transfers the right brand message. Back to the objectives again. That, I'll point out, was never in his sketches, but the amount of sketching that he did allowed his brain to process that information during the downtime, right? And so while he was in his creative funk, he stepped away from the project and probably did other things and got bored at some point in time, allowing his brain to crunch that problem, and it solved it because he had input enough stuff at the beginning. And so then we've got these 2 things, and they come together, and I love that he shows this visual equation so that everybody can look at this and see goat plus fingerprint equals logo, right? And we can kind of get the message. After testing various modifications, simplified symbol versions, different lettering options, and composition options, we decided to settle on a look very close to the initial proposal. And here's some mock-ups of how it looks on business cards. Okay, so let me ask you guys this. How do you feel about the logo now that you've read the write-up compared to when you first saw it mocked up? Did you notice a difference? I'm getting some nods. Are we still in shock because you were reminded that I'm holding you to a high standard and we're just kind of not paying attention to that? So that's kind of
I think like when I first saw it, I was like, oh, yes, that's kind of cool. But after seeing all the concepts and the ideas that went behind it, I think just my work on the logo, on the icon project, to just reading out this logo, is just a good reminder to me that simplicity takes a lot of hard work. And I think I've learned that in my own life as well. Like keeping my life simple takes a lot of hard work.
Yeah, simplicity and organization are not natural states of being, and so they are quite difficult. You'll find this in your life. The more that you know about something, the stronger you feel about that thing, right? And so when you're just introduced to something, then you have an initial reaction. But once you learn a lot more about the creation of that thing, about its story, about the narrative behind it, about the creator itself, you have stronger opinions. And that's one of the reasons why I think write-ups are important and why I have you do them. It's not because I'm trying to come up with busy work, it's because I'm trying to get you work. And so lots of people will read your write-ups and want to hire you because of the quality of the write-up. The quality of the work is good, but there's a lot of good quality work out there. There's a sea of noisy quality work out there. The fact that you can also communicate about your work puts you ahead of it. And so that's one of the things. So with that, if you just take this and you just go down this list, okay, you start off with your objectives, you show your sketches, you talk about your sketches, you show your draft, you talk about your draft, you show your final, you talk about how your final meets your objectives. That will give you a decent write-up, right? And more importantly, in the short term, it'll give you all of the points on the assignment for that. And more importantly, in the long term, it's going to train you to speak about your design. It's going to train you to articulate your work in a way that makes sense to other people, positions you as an expert, and positions you as somebody with experience who knows what they're doing. And that positioning is really important because that positioning is what is going to help people want to give you money for that. So any questions about the write-up? Yeah.
So are we posting these? You mentioned something about Pinterest. We keep posting on.
So you will post this write-up on Behance, and then I will choose several every project, every semester to pin to the board for future examples. So I'll do the Pinterest part. You're welcome to share it in other places if you'd like.
Would you like us to return it, and do you want just the link to the page?
So there's instructions on how to do that, and for time's sake, we'll talk about those on Wednesday. But basically, you're gonna do both. Take a screenshot, put it in the PDF, the submission PDF, and then you're also gonna submit a URL to Island. Yeah.
So specifically, I mean, in that write-up, he narrowed it down to one, because obviously he called for logo design.
Right.
With this, would our final be how they fit together, because we're turning in 12 together, not just narrowing down?
Yeah, I would say that part of your objectives would be to have a cohesive set. And so you're probably going to explain the rules that you've come up with. Because of what I'm trying to communicate and because of the group that I'm trying to say it to, I chose these following rules, that speak to this group, right? I've had people do, what's that show, Psych? I never watched a ton of that show, but apparently there's like pineapple in every episode or something like that. And so when people were doing that, there's like everybody's doing the same thing. There's always little themes that you guys go after, but everybody's doing Psych icons for a while. And they would always include a pineapple, right? And it was because that made sense to that target audience who's seen that show and whatnot. So they'd explain that in the write-up. Okay, let's do some critiques. Are we ready? All right. Okay, so these are looking pretty good. I would say that your shading is off because you have your highlights and your shadows on the same side. So we've got highlights on the right side facing this direction. We've also got shadows on the right side facing this direction. If you have a consistent light source, you're going to have highlights on the opposite side to your shadows because things that face towards the light are going to get brighter, things that face away from the light are going to get darker. Also, this shadow doesn't make any sense. Remember that your shadows are going to define the form. And so what you want to avoid is you want to avoid doing things like this. That doesn't do anything. It would wrap around, it would come up, there'd be a shadow cast from the shell as well. So all of that would be in shadow. Okay, a little bit of this would be in shadow. Maybe some of this would be in shadow. You don't have to use shadows, but you can. But then all of this, okay, this side would be in shadow, this would be in highlight. Because if you have a consistent light source like that. We're a little inconsistent with how we're doing the different parts. Sometimes they overlap without being a closed shape, and sometimes they're a closed shape. The closed shapes don't look great. The tails that have the suggestion of different shapes, but not actually closed shapes, are looking pretty good. And it looks like you've cleaned up a lot of stuff. But where we've got things that are symmetrical right here, this is much closer together than this is right here. There's less of a gap here than there is here. That's why it gets a little muddy right there. And since they can be different, but since they're the same shape, right? They shouldn't feel like they have the same gap. That's going to be the principle of repetition that you have. And then again, I would have a consistent light source throughout the entire icon set. There's the shark in the upper right. Seems like the light source is coming from the upper right-hand corner. Okay, the turtle, it seems like it's coming from the left. This whale in the second row seems like it's coming directly from above. This seems like it's coming all the way from the right. And so the light source is just a little bit off. If I'm ever saying anything that doesn't make any sense to you guys, stop me and ask a question. I'm going to go fast, but that doesn't mean I don't want you guys to participate. Okay, so what we've got here is we've got a lot of random detail, and there's not a lot of overall shape. So overall, we're looking good here, but then we've got this kind of nasty, kind of jaggedy, thin line right here, right? And I realize that we're rolling something, and that it often will look like this. But be careful with your strokes, because your strokes are coming through randomly. Sometimes we've got a dark stroke on the outside of something, and many times we don't. Sometimes we have shadow, and then many times we don't, right? Sometimes we're using a line, and and then at other times we don't. It's inconsistent throughout the set, right? And so I would choose your rules, and I would choose them carefully. Based on what you're doing, I think it's okay to do detail, but I would uniformly apply that detail across everything, right? And so maybe, since we're using white here, and we've got this shape, maybe this shape could be simplified so it's not so, so it's not so much like this. Maybe we could, kind of simplify it a little bit. If not, that's okay too. You can come in and you can say, I'm gonna come along this edge here, okay? And all of this is gonna be a slightly darker value so that it can give us the idea of a cylinder, right? And then these, you're going to apply those. Use shapes to build these things, right? Because this, we've got extra anchor points throughout. And I think I'm the only person in this room that throws away markers. We've got extra anchor points all over the place. I can see them right here. See that weird little jog? Right, it comes up and it jogs and comes around right here, and right here, and right here, and right here, and right here. Just use a circle, right? You make an ellipse. You can adjust the ellipse from there. But you've got extra anchor points and weird competing curves and lines. Okay, same thing with this. There's an extra anchor point right here, okay, that kind of jogs and is kind of a little bit weird. We've got little bits of trapped space. And if everybody just freaked out because I saw a 3-pixel group of trapped space, that's the appropriate response to that. Up at the top right, you've got some trapped space right up here as well. We've got little bits of black that are kind of poking out. It looks unintentional, right? You want to look like you're making intentional decisions. And so here, here, and here, there's that little sliver. Now over here, this becomes really problematic for a number of reasons. One of which is that you have these tiny little sliver shadows that make it look more like a coin than a sphere, because that's not how shadows work on spheres. And then you also have so many of them that it becomes kind of this overwhelming mass. I think you could hint at the idea of that mass rather than have it just be an overwhelming amount here. Remember that it's icons, or it's iconic and it's icons, and so that it's going to be very small. Okay, get rid of the gradients. Also get rid of the thin black strokes. Okay, the thin black strokes look terrible here because as they get small, they get really noisy. Also, it's like the easiest way to tell that an amateur has made something is that there's a bunch of default stuff. You're using default colors, default stroke weights, default stroke colors. All of those things are dead giveaways, right? Now you've got some very well-defined shapes here, and so you don't need this black line here. There's enough contrast between this that I'll be able to see that. That line will be implied. I don't need an actual line there. Okay? As things approach and join other things, they get bigger. This is a rule of nature. So think about a leaf, right? You've got your leaf like this. Okay, and then the stem comes down, and when it reaches the branch, it spreads out. Okay, this is especially true in like rose petals or rose thorns. If you ever see a rose thorn, they're like this, okay, and then they turn into a thorn. It spreads out and thickens as it attaches. The branches themselves, if you have a tree that looks like this, okay, it looks weird because we know that that's not what trees do, right? What trees do is when they break off into branches, they curve out of that joint, okay, and they curve into that joint, okay, and this little curve widens and it strengthens that joint. The only time in nature that you will see the opposite of this is where the design is intended to break. So something like a dandelion, for example. If you look at a dandelion seed, it comes to a sharp point where it attaches, and the reason is the slightest breeze will catch this umbrella part and it breaks off. And so it always looks strange when things join each other at sharp points. And so you look at any die, so you cut yourself on this die, right? And so if you look at this, it's going to curve into those joints. Also, you have the opportunity here to not do tiny little thin white lines, which are not equally spaced, by the way. This one is way closer together than the rest of these. But to have them curve into each other, and also just give me different colors. As these things face towards and away from the light, they get brighter and darker, and so you can do this whole thing like that, okay? Then we've got like lines all over the liquids, also gradients. Lose the gradients, you don't need them. We've got gaps in the feathers that don't make sense. And so let's lose those gaps. And then notice the red, black, white, right? There's so many different color changes because of that stroke that it becomes really noisy, okay? You've done rounded rectangles where you're trying to do a cylinder. Look at how that actually looks, and it'll help you out. If we can see the liquid inside, we're also gonna see the cork, right? If there's gonna be a gap in 2 of these, there should be a gap in all of them.
I have a question.
Yeah.
So the gradient, you mean like the texture of the glass? Like,
I'm saying this darker green to a lighter green, this darker purple to a lighter purple, the darker red to a lighter red. That's a gradient of film. Okay, let's simplify the hair. Way too much detail. Look at these lines and look what you could do with these lines. Okay, instead of having tiny little lines with no thought on how the lines terminate, okay, I think the placement of the lines that you've got is pretty decent, okay, but look at what can happen if we just come in here a little bit and we just start thickening things into shapes that indicate shadows. Okay, look at how much more interesting that is than these tiny little lines that all end in butt caps. Okay, so start thinking in shapes and how these shapes, you've even drawn a line here. Just make that a different color, right? Make it a different value. You've drawn a line instead of having that be a different value. Okay, think of the wings and what shapes are actually making those things up. You've got all of these random scallops kind of around, and it causes problems. Also, watch out for tangents, okay? You have this circle and that edge is causing a tangent. This line right here and meeting this line, we've got 4 lines converging at a point. That gives that point more significance than it should have. It seems important because you're trying to lead my eye with leading lines into this tangential situation, okay? And so you've got a lot of, like, you're headed in a good direction, and I think you've got some unique ways of doing this, but there's a lot of noise going on. There's a lot of noise, and you need to simplify those shapes and think more about the shapes than you do the lines. And then we've got just disorganization, like things that are overlapping the stroke. Notice how it's thicker down here and thinner up here is because you have this part just kind of overlapping that. See what you can do without strokes. See what you can do by turning those strokes into shapes and defining those shadows that way. Okay, lots of tiny little gaps. And notice that it gets really noisy and fuzzy. And that's probably because you're working at a small size, but also because you don't have enough. Either make a bold statement and have enough of a gap to where it looks like a choice, or don't have a gap and have things overlap and define them with light and shadow. Okay, we don't have enough value contrast right here. So either you're going to catch some highlights here, so it helps define that form, or you need to brighten this up more than it is in reality. You're working so small that I can see the pixels here, so I'd probably make this bigger. I think you've got a stroke on the outside edge of what's going on here, but it's so pixelated at this point I can't really tell. But I'm pretty sure that you're using some strokes in some places, and so I would get rid of those strokes. Strokes aren't bad, but bad strokes are bad. So strokes are difficult to kind of get right, but if you look. Okay, so I would completely get away from the textured brush that you're using, because you're using it as a mask to not do shapes well. And so in this situation, you're almost watercoloring more than you are doing vector. And I know that you're doing it in the software and yada, yada, yada. But because it's vector, it seems very repetitive. I can see the repetition of this. And because it's a natural look, having repetition just kind of, it looks super weird. I'm not sure if these are 3 icons or 1 icon, because they don't share a silhouette well, but they're grouped in a way that makes me think that you're trying to make them share a silhouette. And then you've got things like this. There's just a lot of noise going on here, and so at a smaller size, when we start to shrink this down, it just gets more and more noisy. And so let's simplify and go for shapes. You might be able to keep the concept, but you're probably going to have to start over. Okay, lots of tiny little lines. Gradients, get rid of the gradients. It's funny to me that I warn you guys on gradients, you still use gradients. You've got a gradient right here, okay? And you're gonna say, but there's a cylinder there, okay? So figure out how to shade a cylinder without using a gradient. And I'll give you a really easy thing to study. There you go. Lots of cylinders without gradients. Now these two have gradients, right? This is a photograph, so it has a gradient by default. Okay, but if you look at this, look at this, you look at this, you look at this, you see solid shapes, right? Not gradients. They define the highlights, the core shadow, the fall off, the reflected light. Also, you can just go to Google and you can just say, shading a cylinder. Okay, and you'll see tons of people that are going through and they're telling you how to do this. We'll talk more about this probably on Wednesday. But here's some basic shapes that you should know how to shade from different angles. All right, and then we've got several different things going on here. So you've got little tangent problems here, where right up here, this little corner kind of turns in, traps some space there, okay? You've got some trap space kind of all over the place here. We're trying to show some sort of ice cube or some sort of like see-through thing, right? But we've got so many shapes going on, it needs to be simplified, right? We've got little slivers here, tiny little thin lines, okay? Those tiny little thin lines could be defined in a number of ways that are much better and less thin. And then we've got this little Nike swoosh down here. I'm not sure what that's trying to show me. Okay, same thing with here and here. It doesn't define a form that makes any sense. Okay, and so think about this form and think about how the light would hit it, and think about what you would do to define that form. Okay, and look at the inconsistencies of what we've got going on here. Okay, we've got a shadow here on the left. We've got a shadow here on the right. I don't know if that means that this is indented, but that's what it's saying. What it's saying is, I think this shape should be raised, is my guess, because it's supposed to be a nose, right? But the fact that we have a shadow here on the right, and the fact that we have a shadow on the inside on the left, gives the impression that that's sunk in, right? Or it's been carved out of that shape. Okay? Lots of noise here in the eyes where we've got random gaps and some tangents. We'll talk about tangents, because I'm sure that's going to be an issue with most people. You've got some contrast issues here with the eyebrows and the skin. Okay, and this looks like kind of a coin situation. And then the only situation that I can think of where the line on the outside is going to be brighter than the shape on the inside is if that object is glowing. Things that glow have bright edges. Everything else gets darker on the edge. Okay, so things that are illuminating light, or there's light behind it and it is translucent, will get brighter on the edges, but everything else that are solid opaque objects are darker. So that's why that looks weird. Also, they're kind of in a row. Okay, so I'd like to see you play with some color. Okay, we're stuck in black here. This would be a perfect example of an existing symbol that you haven't done anything with. Captain's shield, it exists. It's simple shapes. It's concentric circles with a star in the middle. Do something to that to change it and make it your own. Do something to that so that it feels different. Okay, and then watch out for tiny little things. It looks like you're working kind of small. Increase the size of your artboard. Okay, we got these tiny little strokes. We've got these little gaps here, right? We've got giant thick lines, okay, and then we've got thin lines. So that's pretty inconsistent. At the very top there, you've got kind of spikes that are coming out. These look like accidents. I'm not sure what those are supposed to portray. And then we've got kind of butt cap corners going on an object that seems like it should be sharp. We've got little gaps that look accidental because they're so thin. Either make those gaps bigger or make them not be there so that they overlap. But whatever you do, make it look intentional, but never that thin, especially in an icon set. The grip here is looking great. That's probably one of the better things about this set. Notice how as it approaches the edge, it tapers and rounds. Okay? That feels a lot more realistic than the rest. This is super noisy, doesn't make any sense. Okay? And this is too thin. Okay, and that gray is better than the black. But I still like you to push towards some sort of color and see what's going on. Okay, tiny little thin lines. And we have an opportunity at different spots to not have lines, okay? Like right up here, this is nice. This lighter part, this is nice. This is horrible. That is so noisy that it just, it vibrates. It kind of, just everybody's just feeling pain by looking at this spot. These are a little bit bigger, okay? And they taper nicely kind of into the nose. That's great, okay? This line could be way more interesting. What if this line was a shadow? Okay, what if the jaw was a darker value of green than this and we didn't need a line at all? There's a number of ways that you could do that. And then we're really inconsistent with when we're having lines and when we're not. Sometimes we have lines on the outside of the shape like this, and then other times we don't. Sometimes it gets significantly darker and more saturated, and we have this weird little, I don't know if that's like someone has taken a bite out of the ear or if it's supposed to be folded down, and that's a problem because I'm not sure exactly what's going on. We obviously haven't finished this because we've only got one of those sides that are done. The gaps in these can be more defined, okay? And we're ending at butt caps when it probably should taper or split into a more interesting shape. So we're using a stroke here, and I think we can probably define that shape a little bit better. Let's look at the eyes a little bit. There's some opportunity there. We're coming to points at some times and round at other times. It's not too bad, but having some things be sharp and other things be round, I think you can probably be a little bit more consistent with that. The eyes are a little dull, and that's because they don't have any reflections, and so they kind of look dead. So you could add a little bit of a reflection or some sort of hint of something that would give it kind of an emotion or something along those lines, and then we get the green eyes on this is causing a problem, a number of different conflicts with hue and contrast. Hue contrast and value contrast are kind of causing some issues with that. Okay, so a number of problems with this. The main thing is it is not messy in a playful way. It's messy in an amateur way. And so I think we're trying to go for kind of a single line drawing situation that's kind of fun and playful, but the problem is it just comes off as amateurish and messy. And so look at styles that are like this and try to figure out what the gap is, because the gap is going to be very subtle. This is a hard style to pull off well. Okay, but notice how most of these scallops go right up to the line, but then occasionally we go past the line. That's a mistake. Notice how this part of the pencil, which is carved out of the cylinder itself, is bigger than the cylinder. That's never going to happen, right? And so notice that we've got all of these little crosses coming in here. We've got this overlaps that just a little bit right there, so that causes a tangent. There's a weird gap here. We've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 lines converging at a single point that has no real interest. And so there's kind of a conflict going on there. Some of these are just completely unintelligible and really hard to see what's going on. Weird little gaps, those weird little gaps, be careful with those little overlaps and gaps. Okay, whenever you trap space, whenever you overlap, do it intentionally so it looks like an intentional decision. Okay, and so I think you've got some good concepts here, but remember that you only had to do 6. And so what you've got right now is you've got a quantity over quality issue. So push towards quality. If you need some help doing that, you can get that. Now you can do one of two things. You can start over using these as an idea of what you might do, but do it cleanly this time, or you can try to clean these up. I'm not sure which is going to be more time consuming, but you can kind of look at it.
Scratchy guys.
Okay, these are pretty nice, really solid designs. You might need to simplify a bit because of the high contrast complexity in certain areas. And then I would make them a little bit bigger, because right here it gets noisy and I'm not sure what's going on, but it looks like we've got some little bits of trapped kind of slivers here. And then down here, let's make some of this bigger, because we're transitioning in a really noisy space going from dark to light to dark to light to dark to light, okay? And then there should be more gap or no gap, right? So either this is going to combine into a shape that overlaps, or there's going to be enough of a gap between those shapes that it looks intentional. But right now it looks accidental, an accidental placement because of the conflict, because of the noise. They're too close to each other. Let's have better defined edges on all of these edges. And so it looks like these shapes are kind of ending randomly. Just take this shape, put it over the top, and give us it doesn't have to be a straight line, but a line that we can track and follow. Because there's so many objects that are kind of ending at the edge there. And then this outside edge, it looks like you've got a couple extra anchor points that you could clean up. Looks like the inside of this, the black part, isn't tracking with the outside of that. I'm going to say very similar things just about the rest of this. And so it's really noisy and kind of overlappy and random kind of on this sword and in this part as well. So I would watch out for that, and I would kind of go in. Then you're going to have some issues with, a way to define the edges of these, especially on the lighter colors. So it could be that maybe the sharp edge of the blade gets darker or something along those lines. But figure out a way to kind of define that against white. Okay, so overall looking good. We have some inconsistencies with the level of detail that you're showing, because overall it's fairly simple, and I like the simplicity of that. But then every once in a while we throw in just way too much noise here. You could probably have half as many little scallops and still get the same concept. The placement of these three seems awkward and weird. There's a little extra darker spot right there, right? It takes up about 4 pixels. We're not overlapping these shapes well, and so we get this little indication that's going on. That becomes a problem, okay? There's not enough white here. Okay, I like what's going on with the eye here, okay, except because of the thin black, thin white, and then black, it becomes really noisy because of so many different transitions from white to black to white to black, okay? So thicken up one or more of those so that you get that, or eliminate some. Maybe there's just a white shape in the middle and we don't have a transition from white to black to white to black. It just goes from white to black to white. There'd be a lot fewer transitions there, and that would be helpful. Be very intentional with where your sharp corners are, because those sharp corners indicate a spot that you want us to pay attention to. So right here, it curves and goes sharp. That indicates that we're going to curve around the top of the skull, okay, which is good. If you get too much of that, and it starts to get a little bit noisy. Okay, I'm going to challenge you to find a different color than black, and be really intentional with your shapes. We have a cylinder, we've got 2 circles. Okay, if you're trying to show a bone, okay, then those would all be one solid shape. Okay, even if you're doing kind of the cartoony version of a bone, it's going to be one solid shape. Okay, but you've got 1 shape, 2 shapes, 2 shapes. If you look too closely at that, it becomes problematic from a different perspective, because it seems kind of flawed. So you need to be careful. I don't say that to be funny. I'm saying you need to be careful of unintentional shapes that you might be doing that people will see. These lines are really small. These lines could be thicker, right? Make this look like an intentional pattern. Maybe there's fewer of those shapes and they're thicker, so we kind of get that intentional pattern. These would kind of look better if they tapered to a point. So I like the simplicity of it. I like where it's going. Let's not have half of a circle here. Let's just make that a straight line or a full circle so that we can kind of see what's going on there. If we saw some white on the inside of this bite, that might help as well. All right, so if you're gonna do a darker thing with lighter lines defining it, I would suggest that you don't use lines as much as you use highlights. And those highlights are gonna come in the form of a shape. And then we're kind of inconsistent with what's going on here. And so let's see if you get rid of all of the strokes, if you can start to define things by shapes. I think that's gonna be helpful. You're sort of doing it in parts of this, right? But if this is a necktie, that's kind of a lazy necktie, right? If you look at an actual necktie, it's gonna pinch at the knot. And so you've got the idea of those wrinkles there, but you don't have anything, that's a horrible sound. You don't have anything that's indicating why there are wrinkles there, right? And so instead of having it go straight, okay, into a slightly rounded parallelogram? No, it's not a trapezoid, I don't know. Right. Okay, this is going to come to a point. It's going to curve. Okay, there's different knots and they have different shapes, but it's going to bulge out of this. That's where you're getting those indications. And if you just draw lines there, okay, that's not going to be as good as an actual shadow. Okay, or something along this line where it's going to be a shadow like that or something. Figure out the shadow portion of that and it will help. Kind of be able to help define that, right? Now, there's any number of these depending on, you know, the thickness of the tie or whatever, but it's never going to come down and come up and then come straight out, okay? And then I would say having a line split this right down the center. Notice how it overlaps here and not in a good way. Split this right down the center isn't good. Put that off center one way or the other. Okay, off center is good. Too noisy. Too many small little transitions between the lines. Okay, a line for your door handle rather than a shape. Let's do a shape. Okay, you've got almost black tires. Either make it much lighter or make them the same color, and then it won't look like an accident. Okay, really small, so it becomes a little bit difficult to critique because it's hard to tell what's going on. Your teacup, you're having the issue of having concentric circles in a cylinder, but they don't match up with each other. If you notice that this line, okay, looks way shallower than this line up here. Okay, it looks like they're different parts. They're from different objects or from a different angle. So those all need to kind of match up. And we're seeing way more of this and way less of this. So either this is like 60 feet tall, okay, or the perspective is off. My guess is that the perspective is off. Tiny little detail like this. We got tiny little lines, okay? Let's have these lines be shapes. Make them bigger, make them curve into this line. So we've got this thicker line and these tiny thin lines, and those kind of compete with each other. Then sometimes we have a gap for no reason. Okay, and so let's be consistent with when we have gaps and when we don't. So either you have all gaps or you have no gaps. This gap doesn't make any sense. We've got a line around this, not a line around the rest of it. We've got some of these that have lines, some of them that don't. Okay, so you've got to follow up with your consistency a little bit. You've also got a bit of trap space right here. All right, and that's it. Did I get to everybody? Anybody that I missed? Okay. Okay, so any questions on anything that I went over, anything that you would like me to go over in greater detail? Are we all just stunned into silence at this point? Okay, so if I ask you several questions about some of the things that I mentioned, you guys should know what I'm talking about, right? So somebody tell me what a tangent is.